If you enjoy this podcast, Football for Kids, then go and check out my brand new show, Soccer for Kids, where I explore the lives and journeys and everything else to do with the beautiful game in the USA. The first ever episode is out now, and it's on Christian Pulisic. Search Soccer for Kids on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music and Audible, and listen and follow the show right now. Wakey wakey, the Kellogg's football camps are back this summer. To claim a free place, purchase a promotional pack of Kellogg's cornflakes, Cocoa Pops or Rice Krispies. Scan the QR code on pack or visit kellogg'sfc.com to request your free code. See website for full terms and conditions. Welcome to the Football for Kids podcast with me, Darren Rees. It's time for yet another episode on another team in the English Football League, and a team who have recently been on quite a journey, and a team who have also fairly recently been subject to a celebrity ownership and an enormous TV series about them. There's another team who's had some of that. Who was it? Oh yeah, Wrexham, and of course we've done an episode on them. Anyway, in this episode, of course, we're going to be talking about no other than Birmingham City Football Club in the English Football Championship. Before we get into this episode properly, a massive shout out to everybody who's already checked out my show Soccer for Kids, which is exactly the same as Football for Kids, except for it's based only on US teams and US players. The first ever episode is already out there for you to check out, and it's on Christian Pulisic, one of the greatest US soccer players of all time, and the one I've literally just dropped on Weston McKennie, the Juventus player and the US midfielder who lights up a game every single time he steps foot on the pitch. Now, I've only got one shout out to do on this episode. There's been so many which have come in, but I know that you want me to get straight into the story, so a huge shout out to Theo the Arsenal fan, who on Apple Podcasts gives the podcast 5 stars. He says, hello, please can you give a shout out to me, because I love the podcast so much, but also give my best friend Dylan a shout out. He's also an Arsenal fan. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, Theo the Arsenal fan. A huge shout out to you, to Dylan, and to every single person that you know and you play football with and you go to school with and all of that other good stuff. I really appreciate you taking the time to give the podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people discover it, and it lets them know that it's good before they've even checked it out. So, let's get into it, shall we? On Birmingham City Football Club. Because it wasn't that long ago that Birmingham were in a bit of a bad place. The ownership wasn't going well, and everything was quite frankly falling apart until very recently, when new owners took over the club. And one of those owners is the greatest quarterback of all time, the NFL American football legend and one of the most famous sports people on the planet, Tom Brady. He is now a part owner of Birmingham City F.C. There's also, very recently, been a big cinematic TV series made about the club, and they've been promoted back into the English Football Championship, where they broke some records. But to really understand the journey that Birmingham City Football Club have been on, we need to go all the way back to the very beginning. All the way back to 1875, 150 years ago, a century and a half of football. So as the story goes, and you know that I love a story, like many of the teams that we have spoken about on this podcast, Birmingham City Football Club started with cricket. Many football teams were formed where local cricket players wanted a sport to play in the winter months, and in this case it was some local cricketers from the Holy Trinity Church. They met one night under the stained glass windows of a church, and it was there and then that it was said that the conversation started about forming a football team, which would eventually become a pretty big football team, a football club called Birmingham City Football Club. However, They started being known as Small Heath Alliance, and the team would play football on a piece of wasteland off Arthur Street in the Small Heath area of Birmingham. And just in case you didn't know, Birmingham is the second largest city in the whole of the United Kingdom. Back in the very, very, very early days, 150 years ago, there was no official football league, so Small Heath, as they were known then, would play local friendly matches with other teams just like them, who were mostly made up of cricket players. As more and more people wanted to watch them play, they needed some bigger space. So in 1876, not even I was born then, they moved into a field in a place called Sparkbrook. This was super important because it meant that they could finally charge a little bit of money for people to come in and watch. Then, just a year later, in 1877, they found their forever home. Well, not quite. For 30 years anyway. They moved to a proper football ground on a street called Muntz Street. Can you believe that they only paid £5 to rent it for a whole year? My goodness, how things have changed. This new ground was awesome. It had simple stands for people to sit or stand and enough space for a few thousand noisy brummies. And guess what? One of the very first huge games they played there in 1879 was against their biggest rivals from just across the town, Aston Villa. This was the start of something special, a super intense rivalry between two Birmingham teams that's still going very strongly today. It's called the Second City Derby, and it's always an epic match, and a match which the fans and the players and everyone in attendance is well and truly up for. In the first game, Small Heath, aka Birmingham, beat Villa 1-0. And trust me, the Blues fans will never ever let the Villa fans forget it, even though it was all the way back in 1879. Do you know what year the English Football League officially started? If you said 1888, then you are a football knowledge machine of the highest order, because that, my friends, would be correct. However, Small Heath, aka Birmingham City, didn't actually become a part of the English Second Division until 1892, 17 years after they were formed. They didn't waste any time though, they just casually won the league on their first attempt. Now, I know what you're thinking, that was good, that's handy, they've won the league, now they would have been promoted and everything will be hunky-dory. Well, actually, you'd be wrong. Because back then, winning the league didn't actually mean that you were automatically promoted, like you are today. They had to play in playoffs. Regardless if you won the league or not, you had to win your playoff match to get yourself promoted. Small Heath lost theirs and ended up staying in Division 2, even though they'd already won it that year. Fortunately, the season after, they came second. They won their playoff match and they finally made it into the English top division. By the early 1900s, yes, we're still talking a long time ago, like 125 years ago, the team would eventually rename themselves as Birmingham Football Club, and they would move away from the Small Heath name to their new home, St Andrews. Now get ready, because there's another story incoming, and one I think you might like. That place where the ground is today was built on a disused brickworks, so I'm told anyway. It was a place where some people from the travelling community were based for a period of time. And as the story goes, the folk of the travelling community who were on that bit of land were shifted off it in a pretty unpolite manner. They were moved on with their horses and their carts and everything else which they owned. And it's said that all those years ago, they put a curse on the land which would last 100 years. The curse, of course, was something which was obviously never proven, but it's something that a lot of Birmingham fans blame for losses and bad times for over a century. Well, until it officially expired, and then, well, there wasn't a curse to blame things on. Eventually, that famous ground would be built, and the first match that would take place there would be on December 26th, Boxing Day, 1906. It was a game scheduled against Middlesbrough. However, at that time, they had the heaviest snow they'd seen in years, and 32,000 fans turned up, mucked in with shovels and all sorts of other handheld equipment and cleared the snow off the pitch in the surrounding areas, and the game went ahead. They all piled into the stands, all 32,000 and something of them, and they watched the dullest 0-0 game you could ever imagine in the freezing cold. Over the next few years, the club would have some magical ups and some not so magical downs. In 1921, the club's admin team, listen to this, forgot to submit a particular piece of paperwork to the FA, which meant that they couldn't be involved in the country's most famous competition, the FA Cup. Can you imagine that now, letting the fans know, sorry guys, Barbara in the office was making too many cups of tea, eating all the biscuits, and she forgot to submit the bit of paperwork which means that we can play in the FA Cup. Never mind, maybe we'll be in it next year. However, I've got to tell you, they did redeem themselves a few years later when they met West Brom in the final of the FA Cup at Wembley Stadium in 1931, but they narrowly missed out on victory. Nevertheless, the fans were happy to have a trip to the national stadium and to be in the final of a competition so big. Unfortunately, some more downs followed in the later years, and they were not football related. World War II had kicked off, and Birmingham City's ground, like many grounds in the big cities, was quite badly damaged by the bombing, and football at St Andrews had to stop for quite some time. Over the decades that followed, Birmingham City F.C. had a roller coaster of a journey. They went down the leagues and then up the leagues, and then they went down again and then they went up again, and this continued for a long time, all the way until 2002. When, for the first time ever, they would be promoted to the world-famous English top division, now called the Premier League, the most famous league on earth. In the early and mid-2000s, the club had some magical moments, from finishing in their highest position in the top division for 50 years, to heading to Wembley to win the League Cup final and beating Arsenal in the process to win the trophy. It was a sensational period for the Blues, and a moment that those Birmingham fans who were about then will never ever forget. However, if you haven't realised by now, hopefully you will in a moment. The club have had their ups, and my goodness have they had their downs over the years. But what would follow from 2015 all the way to 2024 would be a pretty miserable time for the Blues. They stayed in the Championship and didn't come close to being promoted for pretty much the whole time. In fact, they were closer to being relegated rather than being promoted almost the entire time between 2015 to 2023. But in that 2023 to 24 season, they were relegated to League One. Birmingham City, the former mid-table Premier League team, the League Cup winners, the team with a huge support base in the second biggest city in the United Kingdom, were now in the third tier of English football. Lots had gone drastically wrong, and the fans, they weren't happy. The season that they went down to League One was the 2023-24 season, and that is when the new owners took control, including the legendary Tom Brady. Tom and the new owners knew they needed to make some changes and inject a lot of money into the club to change things around. And that is exactly what they did. They told the fans that they were there to do good, and my goodness did they back it up. They listened to the fans, they listened to the staff, they spent millions and millions and millions of pounds on the stadium, the ground, the facilities, and of course the team as well. And last season, the 2024-25 season, Birmingham didn't just win the league, they finished with 111 points and only lost 3 games all season. Those 111 points broke the record for the highest amount of points ever earned by a League One team in the history of that division. The changes which Tom and the new owners made really made a difference. And as we go into the 2025-26 season, Birmingham City are back in the EFL Championship, one of the toughest leagues in the whole wide world, and their owners have big expectations and the attitude to go with it to make the club a Premier League giant. Birmingham City have been on one hell of a journey, from the different pitches they've played on to that apparent 100-year curse, to being relegated and promoted and being in real spots of bother for years. They're a club who have got some proper fans, who stick with them through thick and through thin. And with their new ownership and their new way of doing things, maybe they will be a top team once again. But there's only one way to find out, and that is to sit back and watch it all unfold. I hope you've enjoyed this episode on Birmingham City FC. And if you like episodes on football clubs, you can listen to the many other episodes which I have done on the likes of Crystal Palace, Manchester City, Leyton Orient, Plymouth Argyle, Portsmouth, Notts County, Wrexham, and so many others which have such interesting stories and so much history. And remember, if you know someone who loves football just as much as you do, then please tell them about Football for Kids. And whether you're playing football soon, watching it on the telly or pitch side, I hope that you enjoy the game. See you next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.